Hello again and welcome to session 2 of the rules of squash. And like the last time, I just want to remind you of three important websites. There's the Irish Squash website, and I'm on the refereeing page, refereeing and coaching on the refereeing page here. And I've uploaded the YouTube video of session 1, and this is where we'll put the links for these sessions, and after the sessions the link to the video for people who couldn't make it. Reminding you that on our website next year, instead of the 90 odd referees that we have currently, we'll have just those who've undergone the WSO process of updating their qualifications. And of course this is the WSO refereeing portal then, World Squash Officiating. And I've logged in already, and there I am, level 3, and I'm directing your attention, as last time, to the video library that can be filtered to degrees of difficulty. Really worthwhile having a look at these videos, because they're, rather than me talking about it, you're seeing players playing it and making calls, and usually disputing the referee's decision so that the call is going to a video referee. As you know, that's the method in the professional game. So plenty of videos there for you to look at, and there are other resources as well. And the third website I'd bring you to is my own website, squashref.org, in particular the quizzes section, where I've got 2, 4, 6, 8. I've got 10 useful quizzes. I would recommend this one particularly because, for example, in the League Players Essentials, 21 questions there. For example, the referee can award a walkover to a player on court where the opponent has not turned up, and then is it 10 minutes, 20 minutes? What is it? Well, let's see. Look, it's within the time stated in the competition rules, but let's go take the 10 minutes, and you'll see that it's saying no, that according to rule 3.7, and then you're told that the referee may award the match to a player whose opponent is not on court ready to play within the time stated in the competition rules. Actually, in our own competitions in Munster Squash, I think it does hit 10 minutes. And Irish Squash then would have its rules for their competitions, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's dead 10 minutes as well. So anyway, that's an example of what I mean. The quizzes are useful in that for level 0 and level 1 in the WSO platform and refereeing system, it's largely quiz based, and I think that squashref.org will be a big help in that regard. And also on it I've got various resources like the score sheets, horizontal and vertical, and you can find copies of the rules as well, and indeed PowerPoint presentations and the rest of it. That should be of use to you. So going on then to this evening's session, dealing with rules 8, 9 and 10. And interference, of course, is the big problematic rule in squash, caused largely, of course, because both players are on the same side of the court, unlike, for example, in tennis or badminton. So the idea is, having played their own shot, a player must make every effort to clear, get out of the way, so that when the ball rebounds from the front wall, the opponent has, and let's see the 4 things that the opponent is entitled to: a fair view of the ball on its rebound from the front wall, so that if you play the ball right in front of yourself and your opponent cannot see that coming rebounding from the front wall, that is interference. And depending on where the opponent, the player is, how close to the ball the player is, it will be a stroke or a letter or whatever. So fair view unobstructed direct access to the ball. In other words, you must move so that your opponent can get direct access to the ball, that they can move straight to the ball without you being in their way. Space to make a reasonable swing at the ball. That includes a backswing for preparation, the downward stroke towards the ball, and a reasonable follow through with the racket. So if you're not providing them with space to make a reasonable swing, you will see that if you're interfering with the swing, it's probably a let, but if you're actually preventing the swing, it will be a stroke. And the fourth thing that the player is entitled to, the fourth thing that the opponent is entitled to once the player has played his or her shot is the freedom to strike the ball to any part of the front wall. That's usually a strong talking point insofar as if you are, if there's front wall interference, if a player is in your way, and if there's a danger that you would strike them with the ball, there's every chance that you'll get a stroke for that. However, just take for example a right-handed player playing a forehand shot. If the opponent was on the extreme left-hand side of the court, and the player had plenty of the front wall to play, most referees would expect you to play that shot and would look on the interference as minimal, and I imagine would give no let. So that's a debatable point, the final one there, the freedom to strike the ball to any part of the front wall. There will be no let if the interference is accepted. We have to be careful about that. The player plays a drop and is somewhat in the way of me on my way through to the ball, but if I decide that I'm going for it anyway, and I pass that point where the opponent is no longer interfering, and then it dawns on me too late that I'm not going to make it, well, unfortunately I've accepted the interference and I'm not going to get any let. If the interference is minimal, that's a really important modern development and modern application of the rule. There were too many lets, there were too many calls for lets, and too many lets being given where there was interference, but it was very slight interference, and any competent player should have been able to get to the ball, or should have been able to strike the ball. So the modern interpretation of that rule, and of course it's relative to the abilities of the player, is the referee will be thinking, could that player have played that ball? And if they could have, they should have. That's looked on as minimal interference. Where there's a doubt about safety, of course the referee is going to award a let. If the player wouldn't have made a good return, for example, the player plays the ball back down the same side wall and stays there, and the opponent comes down and boasts the ball, for example, up to the opposite corner. If that boast is good enough, and if the player wouldn't have been able to get up there quickly enough to retrieve it, although I am in the player's way, if the referee judges that my opponent wouldn't actually have been able to get the ball and make a good return, there'll be a no let. Even though I am in the way, it will be no let because they wouldn't have made a good return. Similarly, maybe a player is up in the top right of the court and they drop the ball and they make no effort to get out of the way, and the ball drops close to their feet, but their opponent is at the opposite end of the court and wouldn't realistically have got to the ball. That's going to be a no let as well. if the player hadn't made every effort to get to the ball. It's really important that the players are kept honest and that they are truly attempting to get to the ball. If they're simply standing there without even moving, and there's a situation where there's possible interference, the failure on the part of the player to make any effort to get to the ball will mean they won't get a let. Now, interestingly, as you know, if the referee or the marker are unsure of a situation, they shouldn't make a call. We know that on a pickup or on a service or on a ball possibly being out during the rally, unless the marker is certain that the ball is out or not up or down, the marker must say nothing. Similarly, the referee shouldn't intervene unless they're sure. But here we have a rare situation where the referee is being told to interfere, to intervene in the rally for grounds of safety. The referee may allow a let or award a stroke without a request having been made, stopping play if necessary, especially for reasons of safety. The easiest example of that would be where the player or the opponent plays the ball down the centre of the court over their own head, just over it or just over their shoulder, and the incoming player would strike the opponent with the racket or the ball if they were to make an attempt to play it. And if you see them doing so, and if you have the time, you'll call stop and you would award a stroke to the player in those circumstances. That's much safer than allowing the player to strike their opponent with the racket or the ball. Most sources, similar with on my own website squashref.org or on WSO, they give you a checklist so that you can work out if it's a let, a stroke or a no let. Now there's a lot of reading in this, and there's no substitute for doing that reading. I'll go through some of it, and this is the thought process that will be going through the referee's mind in such a very short space of time, in that maybe second or second and a half interval where they're processing the appeal for a let and coming to the decision that it's yes let, no let, or stroke to so-and-so. So let's have a brief look at them. Did interference occur? If it's no, it's simply no let. A player may look for interference when in fact there was none. The opponent had met those four conditions. If there was interference, was it minimal? Because if it was minimal, it's going to be no let again. We've just dealt with that one. So the interference wasn't minimal, so no. Could the obstructed player have got to the ball and made a good return, and was the player making every effort to do so? We've dealt with those two there. Sometimes there is interference, but realistically the player wouldn't have got to the ball because the opponent has played a winner maybe, or it's simply too far away. That will be no let, and similarly it will be no let if the player wasn't making any effort to get there. Did the obstructed, so let's say it's still yes. Did the obstructed player move past the point of interference and play on? That's called accepting the interference, and if that's done, remember it'll be no let. So we have 5 no lets already. Did the obstructed player create the interference in moving to the ball? Now, what does that mean? Your player could have used deception and sent you the wrong way. So you've gone the wrong way. You've bought the dummy, or however one wants to describe it. So you've moved to the right to pick up the drop, but in fact he's played it to the left down the backhand. Now the player is between you and the ball and is now in your way. It's not interference because that was caused by your own initial movement. So no let would be the more correct decision there. Okay, that's 5 no lets. Did the opponent make every effort to avoid the interference? No, this is being dealt with in the negative. If the opponent did not make every effort to avoid the interference, it's going to be a stroke. So the player drops the ball and stays there. The player is making no effort to move. So if you're close enough to hit the ball, that is a stroke for you. Similarly, maybe playing the ball down to length and wandering into that area where your line to the ball, moving into your line to the ball is clearly, can we say clearly, obstruction. Did the interference prevent the player's reasonable swing? So we're getting into stroke here now, as we had in the last one. If you prevent a player's swing, so you've encroached on his area, her area, and they can't bring the racket back to prepare. They can hold it as long as they like. They can't back into you now, mind you. The player whose turn it is to play the ball, the player, they can't back into their opponent and expect to get a stroke. In fact, it will be a no let. But if they're delaying their shot and their opponent encroaches into the area, then thereby preventing them from preparing, with that backswing, that's going to be a stroke. Or if the player is too close to you and you simply cannot strike that ball without striking them. Or if they're in front of you and although you could strike the ball, your follow through will hit them. That's preventing your preparation, your stroke and your reasonable follow through. That's what's included there in the reasonable swing. That will be a stroke to the player. Could the obstructed player have made a winning return? Now, that usually applies to the situation where it's front wall interference by the body of the opponent. The opponent is in the way, and your route to hit that ball to the front wall is through them. If you were to strike that, that is a winning return, and you must get the stroke for it. Now, if the ball is coming from or going to a side wall and you strike your opponent with it, for example, that's only going to be a let. That's not going to be a stroke. Unless, of course, it was coming straight off the back wall and onto that half-court line, and the opponent has stayed on the tee. The returning of that ball to the front wall involves striking your opponent with the ball, so we don't want that to happen, so you're going to get a stroke. But remember, if the opponent is, and we'll get to it in rule 9, in fact, when we go on to it shortly, striking your opponent with the ball is going to the front wall, direct, it's a stroke to the player. But if the ball strikes an opponent on its way from or to the side wall, that will be a let only. Correctly interpreting the interference rule requires a lot of practice and requires a bit of reading up. It's almost it's both academic and practical. You have to read the rules, and you have to get sufficient practice to be able to apply them. And of course, it's the really hard rule in squash, and it's the one that causes that, along with Rule 15 on behaviour, are the ones that cause the greatest difficulties to players if the referee is being inconsistent, and to referees if the players don't know the rules, or are fishing for strokes when there's no stroke on, really. Striking the opponent with the ball. Weird situation, but if you strike your opponent with the ball and it's going straight to the front wall, unless it's dangerous play, you'll get the stroke. You shouldn't deliberately strike your opponent with the ball. If That's dangerous play. If the opponent is right in front of you and you have and is blocking, is front wall interference, you should be calling, and the referee should be giving you a stroke. To strike your opponent with the ball unnecessarily without the opponent having intercepted the ball really would be dangerous play. But what we're dealing with here is a situation where, because of the player's movement, they've moved into the path of the ball once you've struck it. So that's going to be a stroke for you. Unless, there are always unlesses, unless the return wouldn't have been good. Think of a situation where the ball is quite low, close to the ground, and is struck by the player, and it hits the opponent's, let's say, shoe on its way across the floor. Well, can we say there clearly that that ball would have struck the tin, wouldn't have made a good return? So in that circumstance, it will be no let. Not only aren't they getting a stroke, they're not getting a let. If the ball came from or is going to another wall, particularly the side wall, we spoke about that. In other words, if you're posting the ball or you have posted it and it strikes the opponent, it's only going to be a let, assuming the ball would have been good. Sometimes the ball is struck so poorly or so weakly on the post that the referee, know that this ball isn't going to actually make it to the front wall at all, in which case it's no let as well. But assuming that it is going to the front wall and it has been posted, or it's on its way to the side wall, it will be a yes let, not a stroke. If the player is making a further attempt, what's going on there would be, for example, if you had made a forward movement, any forward movement with your racket, and then you change your mind, and forward movement towards striking the ball, and then you change your mind, and you take it later, maybe you let it go back to the court and then you take it, well, that would be a second attempt, and it's only given as a let, it's not given as a stroke. And turning is, for example, a player plays a very good serve and you fail to get it, and you physically turn around after the ball, you're doing a 360. If you strike your opponent with that ball, it's your opponent will get the stroke. Now, most turning doesn't involve physically turning, doing that 360. Turning is also where the ball comes down your left hand side, passes behind you and hits the back wall, and then comes back up on your right hand side. That's looked on as turning as well. Similarly, if you play that ball and strike your opponent with it, it's a stroke to your opponent. And then you have your definition of turning there. It's the action of the player who strikes or is in a position to strike the ball to the right of the body after the ball has passed behind it to the left, or vice versa, whether the player physically turns or not. If the striker could have struck the ball without turning, but turned in order to request a let, no let is allowed. That's particularly important for the very good serve. And if you, the referee, consider that he didn't want to take that serve because it was too good, and he's turned just so he could get a let, well, then you have to give no let in those circumstances. That's a judgment call there, now you can see from the referee. And as we would have seen, of course, in Rule 8, though I may not have mentioned it at the time, the referee's decision is final. So there's your turning. Appeals. Either player can stop a rally and appeal. Now, the danger of doing that, of course, is that if the appeal goes against you, you've just lost the rally. So it makes way more sense to wait until the rally is over and then make your appeal. That's completely, entirely within the rules. The loser of a rally can appeal any call or lack of call by the marker. Notice there, it's only the loser of a rally can appeal. Sometimes you'll have winners of rallies appealing because they're saying, referee, was that earlier ball, was that earlier pickup good? Or was that serve good? And what they're doing there is they're putting you on notice that they didn't think that you spotted something that went wrong. But, like, don't accept it. The rally's over. They won the rally. You'd say, play on, please. No, you're not going to get into a row with them, but I'm merely making the point that the Rule 10 clearly says that it's the loser of a rally can make an appeal of any call or a lack of call. So you're the receiver of the serve and you think it was a fault because maybe it was out, or it didn't pass the short line, or the ball struck the service line. If you think the serve was a fault, really the best thing for you to do is to play out the rally, and if you lose, appeal the serve. And as we said in session 1, that's quite legitimate because the referee is meant not to interfere with the rally unless the referee is certain. So the marker and the referee, if there's two of them there, they may have been unsure of the serve, or in the event that it's a rally, not a serve, they may have been unsure of the pickup, or whether the ball was down or whether it was out. And if they're unsure, they're not meant to intervene. So there, the referee might well be waiting for you to make an appeal at the end of the rally, and that's quite legitimate, you know. After a serve, nothing before the serve can be appealed. So what they're talking about there is, I serve the ball to you, and then you start wondering about my pickup just before, my pickup that won me the previous rally. It's too late. Once the ball is served, anything that happened before it is irrelevant, can't be appealed, unless, of course, the ball is broken. It might be the case that the very last shot of the previous rally was the thing that caused the ball to break, and if you're the receiver of the serve and you think, oh, the ball is broken, the player has just served it, you could be looking for a let, and you could say, referee, was that ball broken maybe at the end of the last rally? And if the referee agrees, a let is going to be allowed. At the end of a game, an appeal must be immediate. They say that because they don't want players having just lost a game out in their interval with their coach, and then they come back in and they appeal the result of the last rally of the previous game. That's not really on. So you'd simply say in those circumstances, sorry, there's no appeal allowed on on anything to do with the previous game. Where a referee is uncertain, a let should be allowed. Now, that doesn't mean you stop a rally and allow a let. What they're talking about there is, if a player has made an appeal and if you do not know for sure, well then you're uncertain and therefore you should allow a let. Now it's important that you don't allow the player's appeal to put the doubt in your mind. If you were quite certain until a player appealed, that appeal shouldn't be the thing to make you uncertain. You see something happening during the rally, you say nothing, and then at the end of the rally, one of the players appeals that, the loser of the rally appeals that. Well, you were already unsure, and then it's entirely right that you say yes, let. And if you simply don't know, you're going to say yes, let. If you can't make up what I mean there is, if you can't make up your mind where was the point of contact there, was it slightly behind the player, was it directly in line with the player? If you're not sure, you're simply going to have to give a let. And the decision of the referee is final. A tough pill to swallow, but even where it's the wrong decision, it is the referee's decision and is final. Calling the tournament referee to overrule the match referee isn't really on, because the tournament referee is going to say the referee's decision was final. Right, we will leave it at that. In a live session, we would have had Q&A after each of the rules, or even during the rules, and that's the thing that often can take lots of time. So that's the end of our session, and I look forward to seeing you all for session 3, where we'll deal with the remainder of the rules.